People have come to the videos and continued to ask, if everything you say is true, why did the currency in Venezuela skyrocket out of control? Why did inflation go nuts? And why were there sporadic areas of food shortages? How do the two things tie together? Well, in today's video, I'm going to try to explain that in a more clear way than I have in the past. Sometimes I get ahead of myself and I go to things that I assume people are going to make the leap for themselves about. I have used this chart a lot to show you that even when Chavez took over in 2000, that socialism by itself didn't destroy anything. In fact, here in 2008, when things nearly completely collapsed for our country, there was no appreciable difference in a place like Venezuela. And at that time, and through this entire time, we have imported the vast majority of their oil because we have the refineries to turn it into usable products. Now, a chart I haven't shown you is this. This is the exact same chart overlaid with oil revenue. Now, let me show you something. Here's when Chavez, the horrible, evil, terrible socialist guy that just ruined Venezuela, took over right here, 2001. Here's their revenues. Look what happened during the 2000s. Look at their oil revenues. Here's 2007, 2008. Look where their oil revenues were, and look what was going on in our country in 2008. Their inflation rate was steady, and they had a massive increase in oil revenues. Of course, in 2009, they went down. That had to do with the U.S. But look what happened again. That was a temporary hiccup, and up and up and up and up it went. Now, all indicators were that the U.S. and the world was in a slowdown going into 2012, 13, and that historically, when that has happened in the past, OPEC, everyone's got together and cut production to account for it, to maintain prices. That's always been the case. But that didn't happen in 2014. In fact, the exact opposite thing happened. The Saudis, inexplicably at the time, increased production along with the United States. And what that did was cause the price per barrel to crater. Now remember, you see the screen line go down. That goes to the amount of money coming in. But remember, the amount of oil going out, physical oil, is the same. So they're having to put out the same amount of money for the same amount of oil, for much, much less money. Then when you add the sanctions in, because when this happens, and it's happened before, countries like this would refinance. They would go and say, okay, we need a loan to get through this temporary hiccup. Well, the U.S. threw these sanctions. After this is when Chavez died and Maduro took over. And they called it first election. Oh, it's so terrible. And, oh, it wasn't, it was fraudulent. And, he's not the real leader and all this kind of stuff. And so they couldn't refinance like they had in the past. They changed the rules, is what I'm getting at here. Everything went into bizarro world for OPEC. And they weren't the only ones affected. The Saudis were affected horribly by this, but they had the amount of cash reserves necessary to deal with it. And we've covered this before. This was Investopedia. We've been here before. We've talked about these 4 reasons Investopedia said that everything cratered. Not the least of which was the Chinese devaluating their currency, making the dollar strong. And when they make the dollar strong, since everybody in the world has to buy the dollar to buy oil, that causes the price of all commodities to fall even more. Then the lifting of the ban on oil exports clearly showed what was going on. And I've brought up 2 new articles today to show you this, one specifically here. And this is from Atlantic Council, January 20, 2015. Here's why Saudi Arabia has let oil prices fall. And while they were hoping they were going to revive by year's end, but they didn't. Because what they didn't understand in this article, what was really going on. Analysts largely agree on the main reasons why the world's benchmark oil price dropped by half in 6 months. Imagine that. I mean, you talk about a country of 30 million people, and I don't mean to get off on a tangent, but everybody's like, well, it's poor management in Venezuela, and they didn't save enough money. Imagine a place like Florida that relies on tourism as its like number one thing to bring in money, dropping by half. Literally, the revenue in 1 year, artificially. And then people saying, well, you should have diversified into cattle and wine exports and rutabagas. I mean, it's just ridiculous because that's what they're saying Venezuela should have done. They should have been more diversified, as if one of the founding members of OPEC was going to export anything else. Little tiny country of 30 million people. But down here, prices began to slide. Many expected Saudi Arabia to engineer a production cut as it has before. Those producing countries that had budgeted for high oil prices, which have very little by way of foreign exchange reserves or rainy day funds, Venezuela, Iran, agitated for that cut, like they always did before. But the Saudis, inexplicably, with support from the UAE, read United States, signal that there is no floor in sight. OPEC members could lose $200 billion in revenues in 2015, even if prices were to stabilize at 80 and they went to 40. Even then, there was disagreement amongst experts about why the Saudis were doing this. Some said that they were trying to attack U.S. shale production up in North Dakota, Brazilian deep water production, or some even said that they were trying to punish Russia and Iran. But that made no sense. The Saudis had no dog in that fight. And this guy agrees with that. What they're saying here is the case is that the Saudis wanted to make themselves more relevant because of new players coming online, like the United States and Russia. They were saying, look, we can still, cause problems in the world oil markets if we want to. And this is what they're talking about here. Now remember, this is something that was written in 2015, before they realized the total ramifications. This was prior to the U.S. lifting the oil ban, the oil export ban. Nobody saw that coming. So the real target of Saudi Arabia's big bluff to let prices fall indefinitely is OPEC itself. Iran and Iraq, with Shia-led governments and huge potential for growth if geopolitics permit, are the strategic threat. Saudi Arabia has signaled for some time that it would not bear the brunt of a production cut alone. But if Iran, Iraq, and Kuwait agree to substantial production cuts, and Nigeria, Libya, and Angola offer at least symbolic gestures to diminish the global light oil oversupply, Saudi Arabia will make a major contribution. So this is what was going on at that time. And people wonder, Dave, why are you so focused on this? Folks, it is going to have everything to do with everything we're talking about very soon. When oil goes up, it's not going to come back down, because there's going to be too many people with a vested interest, including our own government, with it remaining high. Remember, prior to 2015, and this is so important, and I'm going to harp on it, prior to 2015, when oil prices would go down, that would stimulate the U.S. economy, right? And then, of course, when the economy is stimulated, then more revenues to the government through increased business and taxes. Well, now, there's going to be a massive increase in tax revenue to the government from the oil companies that pay these incredibly high rates. So they're not going to care about our economy going down because the government is going to be making more money when it does. Like, for example, if you could tax dollars at 40%, like you would income from a big oil company, why would you worry about dollars taxed at 10 and 15 and 5% like you would in a normal economic boom? This is what's coming. And this is why. And the last thing I'll leave with the U.S. talking about Venezuela and economic mismanagement or not saving, I only have one word: 2008. Are you kidding? We had to use U.S. taxpayer dollars to bail out banks that were too big to fail because they had managed their portfolios so poorly. They had to literally adopt the policies of places like Bolivia and Venezuela and Cuba and China to bail out U.S. hyper-capitalism and big bankers. So they really have no place to stand in this. So that brings us back to here. And this is coming. And when it causes demand destruction in this country, it's not going to stop it. Because there's going to be markets to sell to. When the markets in this country dry up, all they're going to do is go to markets in China. They're going to go to markets in Africa, Asia, and continue to pump our oil and sell it over there, even though we'll be in the throes of one of the worst recessions we've ever seen. So I'll leave it there. Like, share, subscribe. Thank you so much, and we will see you next time. Thank you.